for his life have come to pass. And he begins the first verse of the song saying, "It was all a dream. I used to read Word Up magazine. Salt and Pepper and Heavy D up in the limousine. Hanging pictures on my wall. Every Saturday, Rap Attack, Mr. Magic, Marley Marl." Oh, some of y'all know that song. Amen. Know if y'all knew. I know y'all been listening to Shirley Season and such. The Notorious B.I.G., as he was come to be known in hip-hop land, reflects on all that he has endured, and he closes the song recognizing the journey of a dream becoming reality. He says, "We used to fuss when the landlord dissed us. No heat, wonder why Christmas missed us. Birthdays was the worst days. Now we ship champagne when we thirsty. That's right, I like the life I live, because I went from negative to positive, and it's all..." Thank y'all. Appreciate y'all getting with me. Biggie is standing in the middle of everything he ever wanted, and he can barely believe that it's real. It started as a dream, and somehow, against all the odds stacked against him, this dream became his life. Now, many of us may not be familiar with Christopher Wallace's story or his music or his journey, but I do believe that we are all familiar with what it means to have a dream. We are familiar with what it means to move with a level of expectation, to envision with our hearts something incredible that might transform our lives and the lives of those who are closest to us. I believe we've all had seasons where we've seen something for our lives that was powerful, that was impactful, that was fulfilling, something so deeply connected to our soul that we lived with a level of expectation for it to come to pass. And here's something else that I'm aware of, that for many of us, somewhere along the way, we've forgotten how to dream. So let me ask you today, when is the last time that you had a dream? Not just going to sleep and seeing visions in your mind as you slumber, but when is the last time that you had a dream for your family, for your life, for your community, for your church? Something that you just couldn't let go of. Something that you expected and anticipated would come to pass. The kind of dream that wakes you up. The kind of dream that won't leave you alone. The kind of dream that feels too big to say out loud because you're not sure anyone around you will understand it. When was the last time you experienced that? And maybe the better question is, why did you stop dreaming? What caused you to move away from the dream that God placed on your heart? Maybe life happened, and the responsibilities of life seemed way bigger than pursuing the dream in your mind. Maybe you tried to follow the dream and it didn't work out, and that failure paralyzes you from trying again. Maybe someone you trusted, some voice who was influential in your life told you that the dream was too much, and so you just let it go. Maybe you just got tired of expecting the dream to show up, tired of looking around and seeing nothing in your circumstances reflecting what you saw in your mind. In many ways, that's what this sermon and this series is about today. It's about permission. It's about permission for us to dream again, permission for us to pursue what God has for us, to pursue the vision that God has placed on our lives, to pursue what we know God has placed us on this earth to accomplish, what God has placed us in this community and in this church and in this world to do. The truth is that some of us have lost our expectation that God will do something amazing, and we have placed God within the limits of our own life's experience. We've placed God within the limits of our own disappointments, our own failures, and our own shortcomings, when the truth is that God is so much bigger than all of that. We haven't lost expectation because we stopped believing in God, because we know what it means to believe in God and to follow God. But somewhere along the way, we stopped leaning forward. We stopped anticipating what God would actually do. We stopped believing that God could do exceedingly and abundantly above all that we could ask, think, or imagine. And oftentimes this happens for two reasons. Either because outside conditions have worn us down, because of the environments we found ourselves in, the dysfunction impacting our lives, or the internal or the inside conditions that we looked at ourselves honestly and wondered if we were even the person that God would trust with something so big, so impactful, and so influential. The theologian Howard Thurman is quoted as saying, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go do that." And can I help you today by letting you know that the world needs people who have come alive? The thing that God has placed on your heart, the dream that God has given you, the vision God has for your life that you keep revisiting, that you keep coming back to, is the thing that causes you to come alive. It might not be the thing to make you rich, might not be the thing that makes you famous, but it's the thing that God needs in order for us to live more fully and for the world around us to be transformed. We need people who are living with expectancy, living into the dreams God has placed in their hearts. And here's the timeless truth that we can hold on today, that our external circumstances and our personal shortcomings do not limit an all-powerful God, because God doesn't abandon what God initiates. The dream that God has given us in one season, God does not abandon, and God does not abandon us in the process of pursuing and following and moving into what God has shown us for our lives. And that's what I believe the life of Joseph in the book of Genesis helps us to see in real time. The book of Genesis moves from creation to God's relationship with a particular family, beginning with a man named Abraham and a promise that was made to him, and then to his son Isaac, and then to Isaac's son Jacob. And Genesis 37 opens telling us that Jacob settled in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. And what follows through the end of the book of Genesis is the account of Jacob and his family. Now, at this point in the text, Jacob has 11 sons, and we are introduced to Joseph as the youngest son and the first son of the wife that Jacob actually loved, that was born to him in his old age. And there is some family history here, Lord Jesus, that shapes everything that happens next. When Jacob was a young man, after he had stolen his brother Esau's birthright, his mother sends him away to stay with his family. When he goes to stay with his family, a man named Laban, he fell in love with Rachel, and he worked 7 years to secure her hand in marriage. But Laban tricked him and told him, "Oh, you can't marry the younger daughter," who for Jacob was the fine daughter, "before you marry the older daughter," who Jacob was not attracted to. So Jacob says, "Forget it. In order for if I gotta marry Leah in order to get to Rachel, that's what I do." So he ends up marrying Leah, the older sister, and then works 7 more years in order to take Rachel's hand in marriage. Now he's married to 2 women who are sisters, and now they are at odds with one another, because Leah knows she's not the one that Jacob wanted. He's legally bound to both, but his heart is fully only with one. And to complicate things further, Rachel struggles to have children while Leah conceives children easily. And then, y'all read it in the text, there are the servants, the handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah, whom Jacob also has children with as well. Y'all thought Young and the Restless was good. I know it's 2026. We live in a very different culture than the one reflected in our text, but let me cut across the field here and name the reality that this creates, that I'm sure you can already imagine in your mind, that there is tension, the tension between the mothers becomes tension between the children. Favoritism shows up in the house. And favoritism in families is never a private matter. It shapes every relationship that is downstream of it for generations to come. In fact, Genesis 37:3 tells us explicitly that Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. And because of that, Jacob made Joseph an ornate robe, or like we grew up saying, a coat of many colors. And this caused even more trouble in the house. And the text tells us that his brothers could not even speak a kind word to Joseph. That's how far the relationship was already gone before the dreams ever showed up in the picture. Here's a reality of the household where Joseph is raised. There's grief, there's hierarchy, there's jealousy. There are old wounds layered on top of each other going back generations. And right in the middle of all of this mess, God gives Joseph a dream. Not after the family healed, not after the dysfunction was resolved, not after Joseph matured, not after the conditions were right. Right in the middle of the chaos of his family situation and his own immaturity, God gives Joseph dreams in the middle of the mess. We ought to sit with that for a moment because it's not what we expect. We'd expect God to wait until everything was figured out. We'd expect for the dream to come after healing and after reconciliation and after things had finally sorted themselves out. But that's not what happens here. And so if God gives dreams to people like Joseph who are in the middle of mess in places like this, then what does that tell us about the dreams that God has given us? The first thing that it tells us is that God gives dreams in dysfunctional environments. God gives dreams in dysfunctional environments. Joseph's family history and home environment was wrought with dysfunction and difficulty. And even if he wasn't readily aware of it, he was born as the only son to Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel, and Jacob makes no secret of loving Joseph more than the other kids. All of the drama between the wives and the baby mamas, all of the jealousy of the brothers about his favorite status, and the symbol of this was the ornate robe or the coat of many colors that set Joseph apart from his brothers. Now, here's what we have to understand about this robe. Not only was it an ornate robe that was made up of many colors, but this was also a robe that signified that Joseph was of a higher status than the rest of the family. The robe wasn't built for those who would go out in the fields and shepherd and follow behind sheep. No, shepherds wore garments that had short sleeves on them so that their arms could have the flexibility to be able to move as they tended the flock and had to get their hands dirty. But Joseph's robe had long sleeves on it. This long sleeve robe is the kind of robe that royalty wears. People who would never have to do the dirty work that his brothers did every single day. And y'all, Joseph put on this robe constantly. You know, you get something that look good, you want to wear it all the time. And it was a daily and a visible reminder to his brothers every time that they came in from the field that Joseph was seen as a tier better than they were. It was a sign to Joseph that his father loved him, but it was a signal to his brothers that they didn't quite measure up for their father's love. And Joseph showing up, talking about his dreams, only made things worse. All of this breakdown in the relationship was the perfect space for whatever dreams Joseph was getting to die. And for many of us, our story is that we've been in dysfunctional families. We know what that looks like. Maybe not maybe because of baby mama drama, I don't know. But maybe we know what it's like as being the favorite child. Maybe not. Maybe some of us have been in dysfunctional relationships or caught in toxic and troubling cycles. Maybe some of us have found ourselves in dysfunctional church or ministry environments where folks say one thing and do another and work to block any new thing that shows up to help make things better. Maybe we've been in workplaces where we didn't have the resources that we need, and we barely had enough to survive from one day to the next. And yet, in the midst of all of this, God has given us a dream. And the truth is that some of us are trying to wait for the conditions to be perfect before we allow ourselves to believe that God can do something in us and through us. You're waiting for your family to get it together. You're waiting for your workplace to be more fair. You're waiting for the church to heal from its old wounds. You're waiting for the environment to feel safe enough for you to dream in. But God does not wait for clean environments to plant holy dreams. God doesn't wait for things to be perfect in order to reveal purpose. Here's how we know. You know how a pearl is formed. A pearl is not formed in calm water. In fact, it forms because something gets inside of an oyster that shouldn't be there. A grain of sand that becomes an irritant to the oyster that it never invited and it can't expel. So it does the only thing that it can do. It begins to coat the irritation. Layer after layer in the dark, no guarantee of what it's making, and what comes out of that oyster years later is the most valuable thing that the oyster will ever produce. The pearl is not formed despite the irritation. The irritation is the raw material for the pearl to be created. And some of you are sitting in your own grain of sand right now. You're sitting in a family that wounds you, a workplace that overlooks you, a church season that has disappointed you, and you've been waiting for the irritation to be removed before you believe God can make anything out of your life. But God isn't waiting on it to leave. God is already coating it. And one day, what you thought was just discomfort is going to be the thing that people stand in awe of, because it could have only been formed in what you went through and not around it. So I don't know what God has shown you. I don't know what God has called you to do. I don't know where God is leading you, but I do know this, that we cannot allow our environments to dictate our expectancy. I'm going to say that one more time because you need to put that on your Facebook status this week. We cannot allow our environments to dictate our expectancy. Our environments do not disqualify our God-given dreams, because God plants real dreams in real mess. Things might not be perfect around us, but we serve a perfect God who will stand with us in the midst of the mess and show us what can be for God's glory. Show us what can be for God's glory. God gives dreams in dysfunctional environments, but here's the next thing that we need to know about dreaming again, is that God gives dreams before we have the character to carry them. God gives dreams before we have the character to carry them. Turn to your neighbor and say, I know that's right. Here it is. We could read this story and think Joseph is innocent. We could read it and think that, in fact, that's probably how we learned it in Sunday school, that Joseph is innocent, that he's perfect, that he never does anything wrong, and that's why he's able to receive this dream. But we got to read the text more closely, because Joseph first is a young man. He's how old? 17. How many mature 17-year-olds y'all know? Not only that, but the text tells us that Joseph brings Jacob a bad report about his brothers. Now, you might think that Joseph was doing something noble here, but what Joseph actually was doing was negatively reporting back to his father everything his brothers was doing. In other words, Joseph was being a gossip and a snitch. That's in the text, I promise. And so when he has his dream, Joseph very clearly shows that he has no awareness of what is happening around him, and he goes and shares it with the very people who are already jealous of him and are hating on him. And he doesn't just share it once either. He carries his father's favoritism with either arrogance or naivete, seemingly surprised that people already jealous of him would somehow be excited about the dreams that he was given that said that they would end up bowing down to him. He wears the coat that his father gave him like a trophy. He lacks the emotional intelligence to understand what is happening in his family dynamic. Joseph is immature. Joseph is gifted with the gift of dreaming, but he's also a snitch. He lacks self-awareness, and yet God still sends him 2 dreams about his future. And this is a reminder for us that God will send us dreams in the midst of our dysfunction and in the midst of our immaturity, because the dream is requiring something of us. We are often called into a season of development and growth in order to be prepared for when the dream comes to pass. Our immaturity does not cancel our dreams, but realizing our dreams will demand of us that we grow beyond the point where we are. And perhaps Joseph's situation sounds familiar. Some of us have been given something very real by God, a vision, a calling, a word, a dream, and we've mishandled it. We've announced it too soon. We've shared it with the wrong people. We let pride get mixed up into something that was supposed to be pure. And when it created conflict and when it fell flat, we wondered if the dream was even real in the first place. But here's the truth, y'all. The dream was never the issue. The dream was real. We just weren't finished yet. And any God-given dream requires character development on our part, because the dream is not just about what God does through us, but it is also about what God does in us. God doesn't give us a dream because we're ready in the moment that we receive it. God gives us the dream to help us get ready for what is to come. The dream is the beginning of a process of formation so that when it comes to pass, we are positioned to manage what God has given us. The dream is not the reward at the end, it's the preview at the beginning. Church, I was in St. Croix. And in St. Croix, there are baobab trees. Baobab trees. You may not know what baobab trees are. I encourage you to look them up. But they are trees that are hundreds of years old. They're massive, ancient, among the largest things living on the island of St. Croix. But the story behind them is what makes them sacred. That they come to the island of St. Croix because their seeds were carried across the Atlantic from West Africa, likely in the pockets or the bundles or even on the bodies of enslaved people during the transatlantic slave trade. Some accounts say that they were planted deliberately. A piece of home carried into unimaginable horror, hidden, smuggled, and protected. And they come from a small seed. I'll tell you about how the seed has to be germinated another time. But they come from a small seed that survived the transatlantic crossing that killed millions of people. It survived ships designed for cruelty. It survived people who had no idea if they would live to see the next sunrise, let alone live to see what they had planted grow. It wasn't ready to be a tree yet. It wasn't strong enough to be a hurricane yet. It wasn't wide enough to shelter family prayers or plannings to gather insurrections and breaking away from the slave masters. But it was planted anyway, under the worst possible conditions, by people in the worst possible conditions who had every reason to believe that nothing could grow from where they stood. And that seed that was planted over 250, 300, 400 years ago have trees that are growing and have outlived the slave masters, have outlived the sugarcane mills, have outlived the enslaved folks that put them there in the first place. And this is Joseph at 17. He is not ready to be the dream yet. He doesn't have the wisdom. He doesn't have the humility or the character to carry what God has shown him. But the seed gets planted anyway. Not because Joseph is ready, but because God knows what time and trial will eventually make of him. If you know anything about Joseph's story, you know it took a long time for what was shown to him in chapter 37 to come to pass. He has to go through being placed in a pit and his brothers conspiring to kill him, to being sold into slavery and going into Potiphar's house and ending up in prison before he ever reaches the palace. He needs years of anonymity and faithfulness in obscurity before he can stand in the place that the Lord always intended him to be. The dream isn't planted because the dreamer is mature. It's planted because God can see generations down the road, and some of us are standing exactly where the seed was planted, in a season and in a circumstance and in character that doesn't feel ready for what God has shown us. But the dream doesn't wait for you to be a fully developed, mature tree. It just needs you to let yourself be planted and let the dream be planted in you. And so the challenge is not that your dream is dead. It's not the dream for your life or your family or your ministry or your church, but the challenge is being developed so that you can carry what God has placed in your heart and placed in your spirit. Because while God is building the dream, God is also building the character we need as individuals and the character we need as a community of faith. He's building it right now, building it in us as a church, because the dream demands our development. You can't stay the same and expect to walk into the dream. We got to dream again. Dreaming again requires of us that we recognize that God gives dreams in dysfunctional environments, and that God gives dreams to us even before we have the character to carry them. But finally, and I'm out your way because it's Father's Day, that God gives dreams that are connected to God's plan. Check the text. While the dreams that Joseph receives are the way that God shows up in this particular passage, the truth is that these dreams are connected to a greater reality. God's promise runs through the entire book of Genesis. And Joseph may not realize this at 17, but his dream is connected to what God told his great-grandfather Abraham back in Genesis 12. God tells Abraham that God would make him a great nation from his family, and that God would bless Abraham, and that through Abraham that all the families of the earth would be blessed. And that at that time God made the promise, Abraham didn't have any children with Sarah. Yet God promised him descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. And so the dreams that Joseph has in Genesis 37 of the sheaves bowing down and the stars falling, they aren't a power trip from a teenage mind. No, they are the next chapter in the covenant story that God has already been writing for generations. What Joseph sees in his vision will eventually save not just his family, but will save an entire region from famine. His dream sets up nations being fed because of what God reveals to one young man's life. In time, the whole nation of Israel will experience even greater movements and moments of miracles because of what God reveals to Joseph in this dream. But Joseph can't see any of that in chapter 37. And the truth is that we can't see any of it from where we stand right now either. And this is why it matters that we realize that a God-given dream isn't just for our fulfillment. A God-given dream isn't just for our satisfaction. It's not just for our elevation. It's not just for our glory. It is a dream that is bigger than us. A God-given dream is connected to the past, and it pushes forward into the future because there is a larger story that God is working out, and our dream is part of that story. It will impact people that we've never met. It will reach generations we won't live to see. It will carry forward a covenant that started long before we arrived on the scene. Just as Joseph's story begins by connecting him to the family line before him, your story is connected to what has come before you. The dream God has given you isn't just about today. It's about moving toward what God has already established and planned. It is a testament to God's faithfulness in the midst of our failures and God's presence in the midst of our problems. Too often we view the dream that God has given us within the limits of our own lives, and we miss that it's connected to God's plan for this city, God's plan for this generation, God's plan for this church, God's plan for our communities, God's plan for the world, God's plan for those who are coming behind us. Our dreams are not just nice ideas, but they are puzzle pieces in the plan of God. And that's why we've got to learn, family, to dream again. That's why we have to return to what God has shown us. That's why we have to recognize what God desires to do in our lives and through our lives. And this is why we have to ask God to reveal what connects with the plan that God has for us. The dream that God gave you was never the problem. The dream was never too much. The dream was never too late. The dream was never too far. The dream was real. And the truth is that we weren't in the place of being finished to be able to walk into the dream becoming a reality. So whether you're standing in the middle of a dysfunctional environment that makes you wonder if God could really be doing something in this season, or if you're standing in front of the mirror being honest about your own immaturity, about your own insecurities, about your own unfinished places, and you're wondering if God could trust someone like you with something so big, then I need to let you know that God is not finished with you yet. Because here's what Joseph couldn't see at 17, standing in his coat, telling people about his dreams. He couldn't see the pit that he would fall into. He couldn't see himself in Potiphar's house getting framed for sexual assault. He couldn't see himself spending years in prison. He couldn't see how long the road was going to be. All he had was the dream and a God who was faithful to him, a God who was not finished with him yet. And that's the same thing that we have today. We don't have the full picture. We don't have the full timeline. In fact, Dr. King taught us that faith means that we have to take the first step even when we don't see the whole staircase. We don't even fully have the character that's needed to carry what God has shown us. But all we have is a dream and a God who is faithful to us and a God who is not finished with us yet. So I need you to hear this today. God is not asking you to be ready. God is not asking you to have it all figured out. God is not waiting on your environment to get healthy or your character to become whole before God starts moving on your behalf, because God already knew what God was doing when God gave you the dream in the first place. God knew who you were. God knew your situation. God knew the version of you that God is revealing the dream to. God didn't offer the dysfunction. God didn't cause the dysfunction in Joseph's family any more than God didn't cause the dysfunction in our lives. But God is not surprised by the dysfunction, and God is not stopped by the dysfunction. God works within what is broken without being the author of brokenness. And what God has promised is that God will always be with us. That's good news for somebody today. That God has promised that God will always be with us. That God will never leave us nor forsake us. God kept his promise to Abraham before Joseph was born. God kept his promise to Joseph in a pit and didn't lose track of him. God kept his promise through every single chapter that looked like the dream was dying, and God was building what the dream would actually need to be fulfilled. So we've got to hold on to our expectations and dream again. Even when things don't look like it on the surface, we've got to know that God is working things out on our behalf, that God is pulling things together on our behalf, that God is putting things into place, that God is preparing us to carry what God has shown us that God wants us to carry, because that's the kind of God that we serve. We don't serve a God that starts things and walks away. We don't serve a God who hands us a vision and leaves us to figure it out by ourselves, but we serve a God who initiates and who stays. We serve a God who puts the seed in the ground and cultivates it. We serve a God who calls us and finishes us. So if you stop dreaming because what has happened to you, because your environment has never been bigger than your God, you can dream again. If you stop dreaming because of what you saw when you looked in the mirror, your unfinished places were never a surprise to the God who called you. You can dream again. And if you stop dreaming because it has taken too long and you are tired of expecting, tired of watching, tired of seeing nothing change, you need to know that silence was never God walking away, but it's God working behind the scenes on our behalf. You can dream again, because even in the silence, God is working. Even in the silence, God is moving. Even in the silence, God is still faithful unto us. You can dream again, not because everything has changed, not because you arrived at who you want to be. We've got to dream again, because God does not abandon what God initiates, and he who began a good work in you will see it to completion. You can dream. You can dream again. You can dream again. You individually can dream. I know you got more life behind you than you got in front of you, but you can dream again. Church, we can dream again. We just got to trust that the process that God has been taking us through has been developing us while God's been working out some things behind the scenes. Because God is faithful unto us. God is ever preparing us to walk into what God has for us. You can dream again. Come on, let's stand all over the building today. So we're going to do, of course, our regular call for salvation. If somebody